When Helen Dunmore died a year ago this month, at the age of 64, it seemed unlikely there would be more of her work to come. After a lateish start as a novelist, she was in her 40s when Zennor and Darkness came out in 1993. Her output was prolific, around 50 titles in around 20 years, including novels, poetry and short story collections, children's books and fiction for young adults. The work kept coming right to the end. Even last year, there were 3 new books, a novel, Birdcage Walk, a poetry collection, Inside the Wave, winner of the Costa Book of the Year award, and an illustrated children's book, The Little Sea Dragon's Wild Adventure. Her career may have been cut short, but, as her son and literary executor Patrick Charnley writes in a foreword, she felt satisfied with where she had got to with her work. There wasn't something particular that she wanted to achieve that she would not now be able to do. She had just one suggestion for him: a collection of stories at some point might be nice. She had gathered some together back in 2010, but hadn't pursued the idea. Others had been read on the radio or printed in magazines. She told him about the file she kept in the studio where she worked, on the 8th floor of a tower block overlooking Bristol. And she gave him the passwords for her laptop and iPad. It was left to him to decide how much editing was needed, and whether the stories, more than 30 of them, were worth publishing at all. Mostly they are. This isn't a book written in the shadow of death, as Inside the Wave was. There's not the same resonance and intensity, and some of the stories are slight. But there are new departures on the themes that preoccupied Dunmore: childhood, motherhood, war, friendship, forgotten lives. And where her subject is women under threat or siege, the writing takes off. The first group amount to a sequence, or what might have become a novel, featuring a girl called Nina. First, she's a small child with earache, then a teenager struggling to cope with life in a bedsit, then an art student in a Yeats's wine lodge, shelling out for a round of drinks and wondering how much change she'll get from a pound. The late 60s, early 70s period detail is wonderfully grim: coal bunkers, baby belling ovens, Ascot water heaters, senior service ashtrays, Ajax tins, drawers lined with newspaper, Vesta chow mein, as are the descriptions of Nina living on a diet of baked beans and boiled eggs. But the meticulous attention Dunmore pays to Nina's every action lifts the prose beyond the humdrum. She cradled one egg in each palm, then lowered them carefully into the roiling water. A plume of white ran out, coagulated and began to whirl as she quickly turned down the rink or two. Despite this painstaking particularity, the stories are mere vignettes, frustratingly incomplete, until we reach the last of them. The title piece, in which vulnerable, patronized 17-year-old little Nina, left alone in a large house by the sea on Christmas Day, goes roller skating along the promenade with a friend of hers, the ominously named Mel. It's an exhilarating adventure at first, the cold air stinging Nina's cheeks, as if it carried grains of ice, but when they stop far from town, in fading light, and Mal puts his hands on her neck, "You don't think I'm going to hurt you, do you?" the mood turns menacing. To escape requires her to outwit him, and that's the denouement, not a trick ending but a story that ends with an acrobatic trick. There's menace of a similar kind in another story, A View from the Observatory, in which 2 young women, accessing a view of Clifton Suspension Bridge from Bristol's camera obscura, happen on a woman running away from a man, then being caught. The couple drift out of range, dancing but not dancing, before the man reappears alone. The 2 observers don't discuss what they have seen. It's left to the reader to infer the worst. Dunmore didn't live to see the creepiest one here is a university recruitment officer whose speciality is meeting female Chinese students in his office after hours. He can't understand why his offer to make tea is so frightening to them. But when he lets slip that he was dumped by his one serious girlfriend, and fantasizes about slapping her face until there is nothing left of her smile, the reader smells a rat. Compassion is one of her keynotes. She gives a voice to the voiceless, to the undervalued and overlooked. He's not the only unreliable narrator, nor is it only men who are wildly self-deluding. when the female narrator of A Very Fine House, title courtesy of Crosby, Stills and Nash, proudly takes us round her newly purchased Grade 2 listed home. We're initially willing to be led, but the noises coming from the basement aren't what they seem, and nor is she. When Dunmore's characters talk themselves up, boasting of brilliant careers, as Sophie in Dancer's Feet does, or adoring families, see Mrs. Marianne in Chocolate for Later, it's as well to be suspicious, though once the truth emerges, what Dunmore leaves us feeling isn't betrayal or anger, but pity. Compassion is one of her keynotes. She likes to give a voice to the voiceless, to addicts and self-harmers, to eccentric old ladies, like the one nicknamed Auntie Beanbag, and Muslims wrongly suspected of terrorism, to the undervalued and overlooked. At times the stories are too right-minded for their own good and fall flat. Stop being so kind and understanding, you want to tell her. And how about a few jokes? But humor is not entirely lacking. One of the longest stories here, with Shackleton, set at the dawn of the 20th century, features a woman, Isabel, left holding the baby while her husband Stephen goes off on a polar expedition. Actually, the baby, Clara, is now 5. She was due to have a brother until Isabel miscarried. How much the loss has affected Stephen, pregnant with his journey, is hard to judge, but it has been punishing for Isabel, especially because Stephen's mother Josephine is so unsympathetic. I don't really regard it as a family, if there is only one child. Dunmore is the last person to go in for mother-in-law jokes, but she has fun at the expense of Josephine, portraying her and her friends as old she-elephants trampling and trumpeting and blundering their way through the jungle of North London. A couple of other uncharacteristic pieces here move into the realms of fantasy and fable. More typical are the tributes Dunmore pays to literary forebears. John Donne, whose portrait it seems she once drooled over, "I would have done anything for you when I was 15. Fanny Burney, who had a mastectomy, performed without an anesthetic, when she was 59, and lived for another 29 years. Charlotte Bronte, whose most famous novel Dunmore reinterprets by bringing Grace Poole out of the shadows to diss the sly, spidery Jane Eyre and stake her own claim on Mr. Rochester. The book ends with John Keats, whose last weeks of life, in Rome, are recalled through the eyes of his friend Joseph Severn. It's not only Keats's stoicism and humor that Dunmore homes in on. Sometimes I think I am already buried, with flowers growing over me, but the sketch that Severn made of him as he lay dying, an act of tender commemoration, much like this collection of stories, his breath. A long dragging pause. Another breath. You can live an entire life between one breath and the next. That's where my life was spent, in one night, in one room. The rest is memory. Blake Morrison's latest novel is The Executor. Girl, Balancing is published by Hutchinson. To order a copy for £14.99, or RP £20, go to guardianbookshop.com or call 033033368846. Free UKP.